exciting, incredible.
Hello my friends, I'm Kyle Thompson. This is Research Flat Earth. And as always, welcome back.
Doesn't it strike you, when observing the sun and moon coursing through the sky, that both appear as similar-sized orbs, tracing similarly related 24-hour paths overhead at similar speeds? Is this simply just coincidence? Well, modern astronomy would say, absolutely, no question about it. Despite the sun and moon appearing to be the same size, the sun is in fact 400 times larger and 400 times farther away. The sun is in fact the orbital center, with the very Earth we're standing on spinning around it. Now, during a solar eclipse, it is claimed that the moon is passing between the observer and the sun, thus blocking the light of the sun temporarily from the view of the observer. Okay, then what about lunar eclipses? Well, according to the authorities, as we've all been fed, lunar eclipses occur when the ball Earth moves between the sun and the moon, and we see the resulting shadow. But over 50 times in the last 500 years, none other than the Royal Astronomical Society of Britain has noted lunar eclipses which occurred when both the sun and moon were visible in the sky. Not to mention several of those times when the alleged ball Earth shadow has been seen on the wrong side of the lunar disk. Further, how is it possible that during a total lunar eclipse, the shadow starts off completely black as it creeps up on the moon, but when it fully covers the moon exhibits that signature reddish glow? My own research has led me to see that the authorities know about and are hiding information regarding a black sun, referred to in Vedic cosmology by the names Rahu and Ketu, classically described as orbs which eclipse both the sun and the moon in regular 18-year cycles. So investigate the subject for yourself and ask questions.
Solar eclipses and lunar eclipses. The term eclipse has to do with perspective. Let's say I have a lamp over here, and I turn this lamp on. So that lamp is producing light. And because it's producing light, it can cause eclipses. Eclipses have to do with how the observer is seeing the shadow. So let's draw an observer. And if I had an object here, that object will cast a shadow on the observer. And so in this situation, because the observer, the guy that's seeing all this stuff, because he sees the light source being eclipsed, that means that this is being eclipsed by this being eclipsed. And so in this example, we would say that this is a lampshade eclipse because the observer is losing sight of the lampshade very slightly because there's something in between the observer, you, and the lampshade. The other side of that would be if you had that same object behind the observer, and in this case, the observer's shadow would be hitting the object, but this is still about the observer. This is not about the object, this is about the observer. So, because of this situation where the observer's shadow is falling on the object, that would mean that the object is eclipsed. So You've got two situations that can occur. Either the object is being eclipsed or has been eclipsed. That's where those terms come from, and it all has to do with how the person that's viewing it can see it. So based on those shadows of the moon and the earth, you've got to remember, though, that the reason that we see all of this has to do with the sun, and the sun is extremely bright. So the sun is extremely bright. It's the only light source that we really have in our solar system. The sun is the reason that when we see all of these Apollo program pictures, the sun is the reason that we do not see stars in those pictures. We don't see stars in those pictures because the sun has washed out the background starlight, because there's nothing stopping the sun's radiation smashing into the ground on the moon. And do we see the stars on Earth during the daytime? No. We only landed on the moon during the daytime because that was convenient, to see what you were doing. So we know the sun is extremely bright. And this all has to do with shadows. And when we have a shadow being cast, we have two different distinct parts of that shadow. We have a main part of the shadow, and then we have that secondary part of the shadow. And so we have the umbra and penumbra. Now, we don't really need to know those words in the course, but we do want to discuss how this is going to make a total solar eclipse or a total lunar eclipse, because it depends on where the moon or the sun is falling in these shadows. So, not the moon and the sun, the moon and the earth. Because if we're out here, we've got a partial. If we're in here, we've got a full. Depends on where you are in the parts of this shadow. So here is a video of a solar eclipse happening. So the solar eclipse is happening, and this happened in Reno, Nevada, and you can see the moon move across the sun. Now, as the moon moves across the sun, it blocks out more and more light. Now, the moon just happens to be about the same size of the sun as we view it from Earth, so it perfectly covers up the sun, and we can just see like the corona and stuff around the edges. So this would be what type of eclipse? From the observer view, the sun is being eclipsed by the moon, so it would be a solar eclipse. Now, why don't solar eclipses happen every day? And the reason that they don't happen every day, and also why lunar eclipses do not happen every day, is that looking at the ecliptic of the sun, that imaginary line emanating out from the equator of the sun, the moon is not on that plane. The moon is about 5 degrees above, or you could be considered below that plane. So we have a 5-degree difference. And so in order for us to get these eclipses, the moon has to be in that position spatially where the sun would be, in this case, out behind your head in your field of vision, shining on the moon, and the moon would cast a shadow on the earth. So that 5-degree difference is why we don't get a solar eclipse and a lunar eclipse every day. So the reason no solar eclipse, solar or lunar eclipse, lunar eclipse. So reason no solar or lunar eclipse every 24 hours is because of this idea. Same deal with a lunar eclipse. If we look at another video what's going on, you can actually see in this video, you can see that secondary shadow of the Earth as it starts to pass over the moon. And then as that secondary shadow meets the primary shadow, we get a full total lunar eclipse. Before we had a partial lunar eclipse, and then this would be a full lunar eclipse. Recapping what we've talked about, there's two situations that we can get an eclipse in. We can get a situation where the moon is casting a shadow on the Earth, and this would be a solar eclipse. And the other situation would be the Earth casting a shadow on the moon. And when that happens, we get a lunar eclipse. And why do these not occur every 24 hours? Or sorry, every 28 days. Why do these not occur every 28 days? As the moon goes through its cycle around the Earth, and it has to do with the angle that the moon makes to that ecliptic plane of the sun where all the light comes from. Thank you for watching. This has been Justin Higgins. Have a glorious day and be excellent to each other.
That's what they tell us. At any rate, you're looking at a picture of one of the more famous physicists, Dr. Stephen Hawking. Now, many people, and I'm probably going to go along with it. Many people think that Stephen Hawking is not alive or not anything that they claim whatsoever. You know what I'm saying? Because it doesn't make sense. The poor guy or puppet or whatever he is just crumpled up in a wheelchair, and he talks through an electronic box that could be anybody. So they could be literally using him like a sock puppet. You dig? At any rate, there's an article I wanted to show you guys from geekwire.com, so check this out. For Hawking's 75th birthday, they sent some balloons into space, and I'm going to read the story to you real quick and play you this video. Famed British physicist Stephen Hawking has long wanted to go into space, so what better way to celebrate his birthday than sending him a greeting from near space? Nice. Nice. That is awesome. So here's the picture. Right there, there's the balloons. Happy birthday, Stephen Hawking. But do you notice anything odd about the entire picture? It sure doesn't look like what NASA tells us, correct? It looks like the sun is really, 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 really close. Well, guess what? It is. But that's not what I wanted to show you. Look at that picture. What do you see? Anything wacky about it? Well, hold on. Let's blow that up real quick. See that picture? Let's take a look. In high definition. You notice anything odd about that picture from the sun? Do you see the dot right directly in the middle? Just like the one I was telling you about? Just like the one in the Freemasonic images of the two towers, Jachin and Boaz, with the black hole sun right there? Do you see that? Yeah. That's queer. No? Yeah? Oh, hold on. It's going to get worse. Now, this was a picture somebody took and sent me way back in September, and it looks to be like a portal is opening directly in front of the sun, right? Okay, hold on. And here's video I took just the other day with a Nikon P900. Do you see this big white thing that's moving around in front of the sun? I know it's hard to keep the camera stable while it's zoomed out. I'm still working on getting a tripod, but do you see this large white item? That is some sort of a thing that floats around. I told you about this before, and since I put the video out back in before September, I got a ton of videos from all sorts of people. This white object in front of the sun moves around, but it never leaves. This white ball kind of bounces around in the front of this thing. So hold on. My theory is the portal is in the sun, or the sun is going to open up, or something to that effect, and that's why, while the Awake Project, while all the Hadron Colliders are running at the same time feverishly right now, the portal they're trying to open is going to open in front of the sun. And I think this picture from Hawking kind of backs it up a little bit. This was a video captured by another YouTube channel called the Zion Warrior, and I got his permission to use it. And you can clearly see this item in the middle. Now, a lot of people like to say that this was a built-in feature that cameras use to keep the lenses from being damaged. The only problem is I've debunked that using a Nikon P900, an Apple iPhone 5, 6, and 7, a Canon Rebel, blah, 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 so on and so forth. This video that he caught clearly has an item in the middle of the sun right there. And it's moving. Not only is it moving, but it reflects in the water. You know what I mean? This is absolutely crazy. And I think that they're showing this for a particular reason. I think they're talking to each other once again. Now, I could be totally wrong. I've been wrong many times before. I mean, I was married once, for crying out loud. You know, it happens. But I can't help but think that GeekWire, much like Space.com or any of the other big websites, wouldn't have noticed that right there in the middle of the sun. I mean, for crying out loud, they're framing the photo right there. And I noticed that there's barely any curvature back here, if any at all. Now, I'm not exactly a flat earther, but I'm starting to get a lot of information that's pointing directly in that direction, basically. You know what I'm saying? Because I can literally zoom out to a ship on the Atlantic Ocean that's 18 miles out in the shipping lane, and then zoom in with my camera, and I can still see the water meeting the ship's hull, so forth and so on. I can zoom in on the moon like no tomorrow, but it's 189,000 miles away. I don't know about that. What I am saying is I believe that the sun and the center of the sun, and the reason that they cover the sun up every single solitary day is because the center of the sun is activating. I think their job, I think what they're doing at CERN is working. So this is the video of them launching this balloon to space for whatever reason. And there it goes. And there it goes. Balloons are going up. There you go. And there we go. There we go. And there you see it. Right directly there in the middle of the sun. Either that's a solar simulator or there's a portal opening in the center of the sun. This is their video, not mine. Don't you think if they didn't want us to see this, or if they weren't hinting at it, they wouldn't show it? Instead, they frame it perfectly. And look at that very, very flat horizon. There's no two ways about it. I mean, look at that. There's no curvature there at all. It's completely, totally flat. And then here comes the sun. And there's the item in the center going right by. And there it is again. I mean, come on. It has to be. Everybody's catching this anomaly on film, and it isn't the camera. Not at all. And ever since all this stuff occurred, half the time when you see the sun, there's that weird anomaly that I showed you earlier in it. That's not accurate. That's not correct. And look what happens when look how small the sun gets when the balloon passes in front of it. Watch this. See it? See it right there? Watch. Son of a... Hold on. Here we go. Sorry about that. I'm not very technical. This is phenomenal footage, though. I mean, absolutely phenomenal. Look at that. Zero curvature. This is for a physicist. They're showing this to us on purpose. Just my opinion. There goes the sun again. 92,051 feet. At any rate, leave it in the comment section. Richie from Boston, I am out. Much like the air in that balloon. They're rubbing it in our faces, people. Believe your eyes. Don't believe NASA. NASA is nothing but lies. Let me remind you of one small thing real quick. This is one of the head scientists captured from Nazi Germany, Werner von Braun, who warned us of the final card, the alien deception, blah, blah, blah. That's his grave site marker. This is the guy that sent rockets to the moon, remember? Well, then there's Psalm 19. Now, what does Psalm 19 say? 19:1? The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Why would a guy that sent things to outer space choose that particular Bible verse to put on his grave? Richie from Boston, make up your own mind. I am out. Like, share, subscribe.
Using these discs with balls representing the Earth and Moon, and using the snake-like sun, we can show why eclipses don't happen every month. For the best shadows, use just the light without the ping-pong ball. You can also use a regular light bulb. Now the size of the Earth and the Moon are to scale, but they're too close to each other. They'd have to be about 30 inches apart on this scale. We're also exaggerating the tilt of the Moon's orbit, so it's easier to see. This model is tilted about 30 degrees. The Moon's orbit around the Earth is actually tilted only about 5 degrees from Earth's orbit around the Sun. So why don't eclipses happen every month? Well, the Moon's orbit is tilted compared to the Earth's orbit around the Sun. Let's see what that means. See, the Moon orbits the Earth like this as the Earth orbits the Sun. Now, the Earth orbits the Sun once every
Year.
Good, yeah. And the Moon orbits the Earth once every month. Very good. Now, here's one for each of you. So let's place each of you at a particular place. Let's put you about here, you're about here, you're right about there, and I'll be right here. Now we want all of our tilts to be in the same direction. You see that little dark black stripe on your Earth? Yeah. Okay. Everybody point them in this direction so they're all parallel. So pointing in that direction. Got it? Got it? Let's get yours just tilted perfect, a little bit more, about like that. Good, good. Okay, we're all tilted the same way because it keeps that same tilt throughout the year. Now let's see if anyone has a lunar eclipse. Now, what position does the moon have to be in order for there to be a lunar eclipse? In other words, what phase does it have to be in?
Full moon?
Full moon, right, that's right. So let's move see, I've got to move mine over here so that the moon is opposite the Earth from the sun. So everybody move your moon opposite the Earth from the sun. Good. This is, of course, the sun. This is representing the sun. Very good. Okay, you've all got the right position. Now let's see. Let's check for lunar eclipses. Let's see if I have a lunar eclipse. Let's see. Oh, you see where my moon shadow is here? Mm-hmm. And my Earth shadow is above it?
Yeah.
So my Earth shadow does not hit the moon, right?
Right.
It's the moon shadow is below the Earth shadow, so I'm not going to get a lunar eclipse here. Now, let's check your shadow. Here's your moon, and we'll get it into, let's get your Earth nice and perpendicular. There you go. And there's your moon. There it is at full position. Look, your shadows are aligned. Your moon is in Earth's shadow. So you have...
A lunar eclipse.
You're right. Good. Now let's check yours. Now, why don't you hold that there, and let's see if we can find your shadow here. There it is. And we see that here's your Earth shadow, and there's your moon shadow. Are you going to have a lunar eclipse?
No.
No, because your your moon shadow is above your Earth shadow. Right. So the tilt of Earth's orbit, so the tilt of the moon's orbit compared to the Earth's orbit around the sun, is the reason that we don't have eclipses every month. Now you can continue this by having your visitors move their moon around to new moon position and check for solar eclipses. There are more tips and suggestions in the manual.
Section 9. Cause of solar and lunar eclipses. An eclipse of the sun is caused simply by the moon passing before it, or between it and the observer on the earth. Of this, no question has been raised, but that an eclipse of the moon arises from a shadow of the earth is in every respect unsatisfactory. The earth has been proved to have no motion, either upon axis or in an orbit around the sun, and therefore it could never come between the sun and the moon. The earth is proved to be a plane always underneath the sun and moon, and therefore to speak of its intercepting the light of the sun and thus casting its own shadow upon the moon is to say that which is impossible. Besides this, cases are on record of the sun and eclipsed moon being above the horizon altogether. Quote, "The full moon has sometimes been seen above the horizon before the sun was set. A remarkable instance of this kind was observed at Paris on the 19th of July, 1750, when the moon appeared visibly eclipsed while the sun was distinctly to be seen above the horizon." End quote. Quote, "On the 20th of April, 1837, the moon appeared to rise eclipsed before the sun had set. The same phenomenon was observed on the 20th of September, 1717. End quote. Quote, "In the lunar eclipses of July 17th, 1590, November 3rd, 1648, June 16th, 1666, and May 26th, 1668, the moon rose eclipsed whilst the sun was still apparently above the horizon. These horizontal eclipses were noticed as early as the time of Pliny." End quote. The moon's entire surface, or that portion presented to the earth, has also been distinctly seen during the whole time of a total eclipse, a phenomenon utterly incompatible with the doctrine that the earth's shadow is the cause of it. Quote, "The moon has sometimes shown during a total eclipse with an almost unaccountable distinctness. On December 22nd, 1703, the moon, when totally immersed in the earth's shadow, was visible at Avignon by a ruddy light of such brilliancy that one might have imagined her body to be transparent and to the enlightened from behind. On March 19th, 1848, the above quotes were Astronomy and Astronomical Instruments, page 105, by G.O.G. Carey. Also, McCulloch's Geography, page 85, and Illustrated London Almanac for 1864. The astronomical part in which is by James Glaisher, Esquire of the Greenwich Observatory. And so, on March 19th, 1848, it is stated that so bright was the moon's surface during its total immersion that many persons could not be persuaded that it was eclipsed. Mr. Forster of Bruges states in an account of that eclipse that the light and dark places on the moon's surface could almost be well made out as an ordinary dull moonlit night. Quote, sometimes in a total lunar eclipse, the moon will appear quite obscure in some parts of its surface, and in other parts will exhibit a high degree of illumination. To a certain extent, I witnessed some of these phenomena during the merely partial eclipse of February 7th, 1860. Returning to quote, I prepared during the afternoon of February 6th for witnessing the eclipse without any distinct expectation of seeing much worthy of note. I knew, however, that upwards of 8/10 of the disk would be covered, and I was anxious to observe with what degree of distinctness the eclipsed portion could be viewed, partly as an interesting fact, and partly with a view of verifying or discovering the weak points of an engraving, in which I am concerned, of a lunar eclipse. Quote, after seeing the increased darkness of the penumbra softly merging into the true shadow at the commencement of the eclipse, about 1 o'clock a.m. Greenwich time, I proceeded with pencil and paper, dimly lighted by a distant lamp, to note by name the different lunar mountains and plains, the so-called seas, over which the shadow passed. During the first hour and 10 minutes, I had seen nothing unexpected. I had repeatedly written down my observations of the remarkable clearness with which the moon's eclipsed outline could be seen, both with the naked eye and with the telescope. At 1 hour 58 minutes, however, I suddenly noted the ruddy color of a portion of the moon. I may well have give my notes in the original words as copied next day in a more connected form. 1 hour 58 minutes Greenwich time. I am suddenly struck by the fact that the whole of the western seas of the moon are showing through the shadow with singular sharpness, and that the whole region where they lie has assumed a decidedly reddish tinge, attaining its greatest brightness at a sort of temporary polar region, having Edmayan about the position of its imaginary pole. I particularly notice the Lake of Sleep has disappeared in this brightness instead of standing out in darker shade. And I notice that this so-called polar region is not parallel with the rim of the shadow, but is rather west of it. 2 hours 15 minutes, some clouds, through very thin and transparent, now intervene. 2 hours 20 minutes, the sky is now cleared. How extraordinary is the appearance of the moon! Reddish is not the word to express it. It is red and red hot. I endeavor to think of various red objects with which to compare it, and nothing seems so like as red-hot penny. A red-hot penny, with a little white-hot piece at its lower edge, standing out against the dark blue background. Only it is evidently not a mere disk, but beautifully rounded by shading. Quote, such is its appearance with the naked eye. With the telescope, its surface varies more in tint than with the naked eye, and is of not quite so bright red as when thus viewed. The redness continues to be most perceptible at a distance from the shadow's southern edge, and to be greatest about the region of Endymion. The Hercynian mountains north of Grimaldus are, however, of rather a bright red, and Grimaldus shows well. Merecrisium and the western seas are wonderfully distinct. Not a trace to be seen of Aristarchus or Plato. 2 hours 27 minutes. It is now nearly the middle of the eclipse. The red color is very brilliant to the naked eye. After this, I noticed a progressive change of tint in the moon, 2 hours 50 minutes. The moon does not seem to the naked eye of so bright a red as before, and I again am reminded by its tint of red-hot copper, or rather copper which has begun to cool. The whole Grimaldi is now uncovered. Through the telescope, I noticed a decided gray shade at the lower part of the eclipsed portion, and the various small craters give it a stippled effect, like the old aquatint engravings. The upper part is reddish, but two graceful bluish curves like horns mark the form of the Hercynian mountains, and the bright region on the other limb of the moon. These are visible also to the naked eye. Quote, at 3 hours 5 minutes the redness had almost disappeared. A very few minutes afterwards no trace of it remained. Long clouds came on. I watched the moon, however, occasionally gaining a glimpse of its disk, still a quarter to 4 o'clock, when for the last time on that occasion I saw it faintly appearing through the clouds, nearly a full moon again. And then I took leave of it, feeling amply repaid for my vigil by the beautiful spectacle which I had seen." End quote. Mr. Walkey, who observed the lunar eclipse of March 19, 1848, near Columption, says, quote, "The appearances were as usual till 20 minutes past 9. At that period, and for the space of the next hour, instead of an eclipse, or the shadow, or umbra, of the earth being the cause of the total obscurity of the moon, the whole phase of that body became very quickly and most beautifully," the previous quotes were from the Honorable Mrs. Ward, Trimleston House, near Dublin, in Recreative Science, page 281. "The whole phase of that body became very quickly and most beautifully illuminated, and assumed in the appearance of the glowing heat of fire from the furnace, rather tinged with a deep red. The whole disk of the moon being as perfect with light as if there had been no eclipse whatever. The moon positively gave good light from its disk during the total eclipse." End quote. In the astronomical portion of the, quote, Illustrated London Almanac for 1864, end quote, by Mr. Glaisher, a beautiful tinted engraving is given representing the appearance of the moon during the total eclipse of June 1st, 1863, when all the light and dark places, the so-called mountains, seas, etc., were plainly visible. In the accompanying descriptive chapter, the following sentences occur. Quote, "At the time of totality, the moon presented a soft woolly appearance, apparently more globular in form than when fully illuminated. Traces of the larger and brighter mountains were visible at the time of totality, and particularly the bright rays proceeding from the Tycho, Kepler, and Aristarchus. At first, when the obscured part was of small dimensions, it was of an iron-gray tint, but as it approached totality, the reddish light became so apparent that it was remarked that the moon seemed to be on fire, and when the totality had commenced, it certainly looked like a fire." Previous quotes from Philosophical Magazine, number 220, for August of 1848. "Certainly looked like a fire smoldering in its ashes and almost going out." End quote. If then the sun and moon have many times been seen over the horizon when the latter was eclipsed, so how can it be said that the earth's shadow was the cause of a lunar eclipse, when the earth was not between or in line with the sun and moon? And how can the moon's non-luminous surface be distinctly visible and illuminated during the very totality of an eclipse, if all the light of the sun is intercepted by the earth? Question mark. Again, if the moon is a sphere, which it is declared to be, how can its surface reflect the light of the sun? If her surface was a mass of polished silver, it could not reflect from more than a mere point. Let a silvered glass ball or a globe of considerable size be held before a lamp of fire or any magnitude, it will be seen that instead of the whole surface reflecting light, there will be a very small portion only illuminated. But the moon's whole surface is brilliantly illuminated, a condition or effect utterly impossible if it be spherical. The surface might be illuminated from the sun or any other source if opaque, instead of polished like an ordinary silvered mirror, but it could not shine intensively from every part of it, and brightly illuminate the objects before it, as the moon does so beautifully when full and in clear firmament. If the earth were admitted to be globular, and to move, and to be capable of throwing a shadow by intercepting the light of the sun, it would be impossible for a lunar eclipse to occur thereby, unless at the same time the moon be proved to be non-luminous, and to shine only by reflection. But this is not proved. It is only assumed as an essential part of a theory. The contrary is capable of proof, and proof beyond the power of doubt, visually, that the moon is self-luminous, or shines with a light peculiar to herself, and therefore independently of the sun. A reflector necessarily gives off what it receives. If a mass of red-hot metal be placed before a plane or a concave surface, heat will be reflected. If snow or ice be similarly placed, cold will be reflected. If light or ordinary colored be presented, the same will be reflected. If sound of a given pitch be produced, the same pitch will be reflected. If the note A can be sounded upon a musical instrument, a reflector would not turn the note B or C, but the same note, altered only in degree or intensity, but not in pitch. A reflector receiving a red light would not return a blue or yellow light. A reflector collecting the cold from a mass of ice would not throw off heat, nor the contrary. Nor could the moon, if a reflector, radiate or throw down upon the earth any other lights than such she receives from the sun. No difference could exist in the quality or character of the light, and it could differ in no respect but the quantity or intensity. The light of the sun and of the moon are different in their general appearance, in the color and action upon the eye. The sun's light is drying and preservative, or antiseptic. The moon's light is damp and putrefactive. The sun's rays will put out a common fire. The moon's light will increase the combustion. The light of the sun falling upon certain chemical substances produces a change of color, as in photographic and other processes. The light of the moon fails to produce the same effect. Dr. Lardner, at page 121 of his excellent work, quote, The Museum of Science, end quote, says, quote, the most striking instance of the effect of certain rays of solar light in blackening a light-colored substance is afforded by chloride or silver. Which is a white substance, but which immediately becomes black when acted upon by the rays near the violet extremity of the spectrum. This substance, however, highly susceptible as it is of having its color affected by light, is, nevertheless, found not to be changed in any sensible degree when exposed to the light of the moon, even when that light is condensed by the most powerful burning lenses. End quote. The sun's light, when concentrated by a number of mirrors or a large burning lens, produces a focus which is entirely non-luminous, but in which the heat is so great that metallic and alkaline substances are quickly fused. Earthy and mineral compounds almost immediately vitrified, and all animal and vegetable structures in a few seconds burned up and destroyed. But the moon's light is so concentrated, produces a brilliant focus, so luminous that it's difficult to look upon it, and yet there is no increase of temperature. Quote, if the most delicate thermometer be exposed to the full light of the moon, shining with its greatest luster, the mercury is not elevated a hair's breadth. Neither would it be if exposed to the focus of her rays concentrated by the most powerful lenses. This has been proved by actual experiment. End quote. Quote, this question has been submitted to the test of direct experiment. The bulb of a thermometer is sufficiently sensitive to render apparent change of temperature amounting to the thousandth part of a degree was placed in the focus of a concave reflector of vast dimensions, which being directed to the moon, the lunar rays were collected with great power upon it. These quotes are from All the Year Round by Dickens. Not the slightest change, however, was produced in the thermometric column, proving that a concentration of rays sufficient to fuse gold if they proceeded from the sun does not produce a change of temperature so great as the thousandth part of a degree when they proceed from the moon. End quote. Quote, the light from the moon, though concentrated by the most powerful burning lens available at the time, is incapable of raising the temperature of the most delicate thermometer. M. de la Hire collected the rays of the full moon when on the meridian by means of burning glass 35 inches in diameter and made them fall on the bulb of a delicate air thermometer. No effect was produced, though the lunar rays by this glass were concentrated 300 times. End quote. Quote, Professor Forbes concentrated the moon's light by a lens 30 inches in diameter its focal distance being about 41 inches, and having a power of concentration exceeding 6,000 times. The image of the moon, which was only 18 hours past full and less than 2 hours from the meridian, was brilliantly thrown by this lens on the extremity of a commodious thermopile. Although the observations were made in the most unexceptional manner, and supposing that half the rays were reflected, dispersed, and absorbed, though the light of the moon was concentrated, this quote is from Dr. Lardner's Museum of Science, page 115, though the light of the moon was concentrated 3,000 times, not the slightest thermo effect was produced. In the so-called Lancet, or medical journal, for March 14, 1856, particulars are given of several experiments which proved that the moon's rays, when concentrated, actually reduced the temperature upon a thermometer more than 8 degrees. Quote, "The cold, chaste moon, the queen of heaven, bright isles, who makes all beautiful, on which she smiles, that wandering shrine of soft yet icy flame, which ever is transformed, yet still the same, and warms but not illumes." Shelley. The so-called pale cold moon is an expression not only beautifully poetic, but evidently true philosophically. If, as we have now seen, the very nature of a reflector demands certain conditions, and the moon does not manifest these conditions, it must of necessity be concluded that the moon is not a reflector, but a self-luminous body. If self-luminous, her surface could not be darkened or eclipsed by a shadow of the earth. Supposing such were thrown upon it, the luminosity, instead of being diminished, would be greater in proportion to the greater density, or, previous quotes from Dr. Noad's Lectures on Chemistry, page 334, greater in proportion to the greater density or darkness of the shadow. As the light in a lantern shines most brightly in the darkest places, so would the moon's self-luminous surface be most intense in the deepest part of the earth's shadow. It is thus rendered undeniable that a lunar eclipse does not and could not arise from a shadow of the earth. As a solar eclipse occurs from the moon passing over the sun, so, from the evidence, it is clear that a lunar eclipse can only arise from a similar cause, a body semi-transparent and well-defined passing before the moon, or between her surface and the observer on the surface of the earth. That such a body exists is admitted by several distinguished astronomers. In the report of the Council of the Royal Astronomical Society for June 1850, it is stated, quote, "We may well doubt whether that a body which we call the moon is the only satellite of the earth," end quote. In the report of the Academy of Sciences for October 12, 1846, and again for August 1847, the director of one of the French observatories gives a number of observations and calculations which have led him to conclude that, quote, "There is at least one non-luminous body of considerable magnitude which is attached as a satellite to this earth." End quote. Persons who are unacquainted with the methods of calculating eclipses and other, aforesaid quote referred to in Lardner's quote Museum of Science, page 159, persons who are unacquainted with the methods of calculating eclipses and other astronomical phenomena are prone to look upon the correctness of these calculations as powerful arguments in favor of the doctrine of the earth's rotundity and the Newtonian philosophy, generally speaking. But this is erroneous. Whatever theory is adopted, or if all theories are discarded, the same results may follow, because the necessary data may be tabulated and employed independently of all theory, or may be mixed up with any, even the most opposite doctrines, or kept distinct from every system, just as the operator may decide. The tables of the moon's relative positions for almost any second of the time are purely practical, the result of long continued observation, and may or may not be mixed up with the hypothesis. In Smith's quote, rise and progress of astronomy, end quote. Speaking of Ptolemy, who lived in the 2nd century of the Christian era, it is said, quote, the considered defects of his system did not prevent him from calculating all the eclipses that were to happen from 600 years to come, end quote. Professor Partington, at page 370 of his lectures on natural philosophy, says, quote, the most ancient observations of which we are in possession that are sufficiently accurate to be employed in astronomical calculations are those made at Babylon about 719 years before the Christian era. Of 3 eclipses of the moon, Ptolemy, who has transmitted them to us, employed them for determining the period of the moon's mean motion, and therefore had probably none more ancient on which he could depend. The Chaldeans, however, must have made a long series of observations before they could discover their Saros, or lunar period, of 6,585 1/3 days, or about 18 years, at which time, as they had learnt, the place of the moon, her node and apogee, returned nearly to the same situation with respect to the earth and sun, and, of course, a series of nearly similar eclipses occur, end quote. Sir Richard Phillips, in his, quote, Millions of Facts, at page 388, says, quote, the procession of astronomy arises not from theories, but from prolonged observations, and the regularity of the motions, or the ascertained uniformity of their irregularities. Ephemerides of the planets' places, of eclipses, etc., have been published for over 300 years, and were nearly as precise as at present, end quote. Quote, these are coming from Somerville's Physical Sciences, page 46. Quote, no particular theory is required to calculate the eclipses, and the calculations
It's no doubt that the Flat Earth movement has been used as a psychological operation with a purpose of division. However, that does not discount the fact that it is based on truth.
Over 100 years ago, the Hawaiian Gazette published a story about a map that was made in the 10th century.
This newly discovered map is drawn on the principles of the Mercator projection, echoes the current accepted Flat Earth model, as well as the UN flag. However, there is one significant difference, and that is that our dome is surrounded by dozens of islands.
Reputed to be drawn by Chinese priests, the manuscript was hidden away from authorities for centuries. However, a letter found claims that the map was actually drawn by Buddhist priests much earlier in time.
The article goes on to read, the map was found by my brother in a Japanese temple in the mountains of Japan, said Dr. Kabayashi. It has been hidden from the Japanese government in modern times, just as it was in ancient times. For in olden days, such a map would have been destroyed by the authorities.
This begs the question, why would the authorities be so concerned about a map that they would destroy it?
So what is the truth about where we live? Do we live on a globe, flying through space? Do we live inside of a dome? Are we living on an endless plain? Or are there dozens of civilizations watching and waiting for us to remember who we are and where we come from?
stood and stared at it, marveled at its beauty, its genius. Billions of people just living out their lives, oblivious.
If you did like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. If you haven't subscribed, hit the red subscribe button. Also click on the little bell icon to get notifications of my flat earth videos, which I upload every day.